Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul Kalemkiarian, and we have a very special guest today. Wine Talks is sponsored by the Original Wine of the Month Club, easy for you to say, where we have been shipping wine to our customers for 48 years. You can find Wine Talks on Spotify, Google Play, and or your favorite iTunes station. But back to the real subject today. We have a wonderful guest, two guests today. We have Romain Ducolomb, right?
Perfect.
Everybody says perfect when I say it wrong anyway. And Thomas Coutier from Duclot. We're going to talk Bordeaux today, and we're going to talk classified Bordeaux. We're going to talk about growing up in the wine business. We're going to talk about the difficulties and actually the pleasures, because it's such a great industry to be part of, you know. So, but Beychevelle, Château Beychevelle, is a fourth growth Bordeaux, and it's from the north. Is it Medoc? No, it's the Medoc.
It's on the Medoc appellation, but actually it's Saint-Julien.
Saint-Julien. So I like to talk about the classification just for fun, but we're going to do that later. I want to talk about young Romain, who was, bounding in the vineyards of what was the name of the town you grew up in?
Bugey.
No, I think it's an important thing that I've interviewed a lot of winemakers who were not going to be in the family business, didn't start out to be in the family business. They went to med school. They went to school to be lawyers, and they end up back in the vineyard. So tell us about what you were doing when you were young and what you wanted to do.
Well, I born in a family who owned a vineyard called Bugey, Bugey, between Lyon and Geneva. And it was quite natural to be involved in this career. I was programmed to be the owner of the family vineyard, but things has slightly be different because it happened pretty well for me in the study. So after Burgundy, to be an enologist in Burgundy, I became an engineer, master of science in Bordeaux. I studied business school in Paris, and so far that's it. And at that point, I met my wife in Bordeaux.
Oh, that's the most important thing that could have ever happened, right?
Yeah, more than the study, and make things slightly different. So started to work in Bordeaux, be happy in Bordeaux, and so still in the wine business, but not managing for the moment the family vineyard. Let's see in the future what will happen, but probably I will stay in Bordeaux.
So you said that town is about 15 minutes from Lyon,
right?
Which of course is the gastronomic capital of France.
Exactly.
Many famous chefs come from there.
Right.
But it seems to be a triangle, right? You head to Burgundy, or you can come down to your little town. So how little is this town that you grew up in?
It's 500 people.
Oh, that's very little.
And when I'm married, probably 450 was present at my wedding, at my mariage.
So who are the? I would feel bad for the 50 people that didn't get to come.
Well, but because there was very friend. We are friends with almost everybody. They were all our consumer and clients and friends, most of that. But maybe the 50, because they were on holidays, they were not present, or they were just so old that they cannot come to the wedding. But all the village was very welcome to my wedding. So
it was at the village.
Yeah, exactly.
That's amazing. So at that village, you have a vineyard, but you mentioned a rosé or a sparkling wine,
exactly,
which I may have had one in my 30 years of tasted it. So is that typical of the village or just typical of your vineyard?
No, typical of this appellation. In fact, the appellation is called Bugey. It's around 500 hectares, but in very small plot everywhere in the mountains. So lovely, but difficult to work. And this specific rosé sparkling natural method called method ancestral is more part of this appellation. Is not typical of my own business.
Okay, so that's it. When you mentioned it downstairs, and I've heard of it, but you have method champenois, method traditionnel, you have charmat, you have a transfer method, but ancestral
Ancestral.
What does it?
Ancestral means the fermentations happen in the bottle and we make quite. It's natural fermentation. We don't have, with the champagne there are two fermentation. First you make a still white wine, then you add a little bit of yeast and sugar and wine, and it makes natural bubble, and that's it. For the ancestral method, you make your wines, and once it started to ferment, to create it bubbles, at a certain point you put it into bottles, and that's it. And by the pressure, it will stop and leave a little bit of sugar.
Really?
With the natural rosé color, very very fruity aromas like fraise des bois,
Raspberry.
yeah. And strawberry. So natural sugar residual they will have because due to the pressure the yeast are not able to transform.
That's fascinating. So the fermentation gets
killed by
stopped.
itself. Yeah, due to the pressure.
From the pressure.
Yeah.
And so there's no disgorging, no reef thing.
We do. Otherwise, too much sediment. But in the past, it wasn't the case.
So it's very natural.
It's very natural and very unusual. In my mind, I don't think it exists anywhere in the world.
I don't think so because I've heard the process.
It is very funny because it's low in alcohol. It's around. I mean, you pick the grapes. Usually, it's made with Gamay or Pulsar from Jura Mountains. And you pick the grapes. The natural potential is around 12 degrees alcohol. So you start the fermentation. You put the juice into the bottle, and then it will stop at around 8 degrees alcohol. And the rest, between 8 transform into alcohol till 12, will be stay in sugar. So it's natural sugar.
It's around 8 or 9%, then the rest is a little bit of sugar.
Exactly. With the natural high acidity, which balance very well, plus very fruity in the flavor. That's very, very nice, actually.
There's a movement, we'll talk about it a little bit when we get to Bordeaux, but there's this huge movement in the world of wine and the consumer side, and we've talked about it a little bit downstairs, keto diets, which wouldn't work with this because there's sugar, but natural, the word natural wine, which doesn't mean anything in our world, but it does to the consumer, organic and biodynamic. Very important aspect, so I want to get back to that. So you left your little town, and you went to Paris after you went through school, l'école secondaire, etc., and then you ended up in Paris for engineering.
Engineering in Bordeaux and business school in Paris.
Business school in Paris.
Yeah.
What kind of engineering?
Agriculture. So I was already engaged in that business.
So part of that business.
Yeah.
But not necessarily enology, but agriculture.
Oh no, always with a link with enology, because you see there is no. I studied in Burgundy enology. I did my master's degrees in Bordeaux. It's always placed with the wine connection. So no, that was always with the link. I've been always very loved with the wine. So no, is not. It's like a normal way to be there to nowadays. Right. So
because like I mentioned, a lot of people start out, I don't know, even Robert Mondavi Jr., the grandson of the great Robert Mondavi, he was told, you're not going to do this now. You're going to go do something else, and then you're going to come back.
That's right.
And I mentioned Clovis Tétanger. He was going to be an engineer, a finance guy, and ended back in the property. And then Monsieur Bignon from Talbot.
Right.
He was an attorney, right? So I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
But you come back to your roots. This is what you know, right?
Exactly.
This is what your passion is.
Exactly.
I think what's lost a lot of times in the world of wine and is more obvious in French and European towns and industry is the passion for what it is.
Exactly.
It's not just business.
No, in that kind of business. No, in the wine industry. If you don't have any patience, you will not appreciate the weather because it's too wet, too hot, too sunny, not enough, and so on. So,
I suppose that's kind of why when you go to Bordeaux, you don't just drive down the street and pull into a parking lot and just go to a tasting room, right? It's much more structured than that. You have to call ahead, and the restaurants are few and far between compared to that. So you went to Paris school. Did you actually then go work for a company after you left school to do something else?
I worked a little bit, so many different company, nothing very engaging. I mean,
Not that interesting.
or not very interesting. So a little bit in the finance, but not so long. And then work a little bit around the world for Robert Mondavi in Napa Valley, in New Zealand, in Hungary, a little bit, of course, in Burgundy. And then I found my first real job as a winemaker full-time, I mean, in charge of the responsibility of the production, making the wine and so on, at Château Clinet, based in Pomerol. That was my first very experience where I have to take my responsibility. So.
Yeah, so how long were you there?
Between 2005 and 2012.
No, quite a long time.
Yep.
Thomas, did you bring me? Have you brought me a Clinet? No, you don't carry that.
We do.
Oh, you do. Oh, I want to taste it. I want to taste one of his vintages.
Oh, my vintage. One of them is quite famous. The 2009 Château Clinet is considered to be one of the legend wine, mythic wine, at least from this estate. It has been very well noted, well ranking, and more of that. The wine is pretty good, yeah.
So
Pomerol.
So
close to Saint-Emilion.
One of the conversations I haven't had a chance to peel back on, maybe we can get to it, is sort of describing as we head down Bordeaux from the Haut-Médoc all the way through to Bordeaux. But I find it fascinating, particularly many times winemakers come through here that have been in Burgundy, which is a completely different animal with a completely different grape and a whole different terroir,
right?
And end up in Bordeaux or vice versa.
Yeah, vice versa. I'm not so sure. Bordeaux is actually, in terms of business, is quite big, and it offers more opportunity for employee or for people with some knowledge to make a career. In Burgundy, that's great, but it's always owned by small property with a family business. So to have some chance to be the winemaker or general manager over there is more complicated than in Bordeaux. And now we have to recognize that in Bordeaux they are more and more open-minded, and they offers the opportunity for people abroad to be in responsibility in their business. So
I think Thomas brought a winemaker. I interviewed a winemaker who was saying that the propriétaire of the winery in Bordeaux had tried to start in Burgundy, and they were almost boxed out. There was no property to have, and if you wanted it, you had to stand in line to get it. And they ended up in Bordeaux because is it that much larger? It is. Well, it's a huge parcel.
Yeah.
I mean,
Beychevelle is around 100 hectares, and it's not rare. There are many different big chateaux, or otherwise you find maybe also it was the case up till now, let's see in the future, but more investor in Bordeaux who buy the chateau, but they don't know how to manage, how to make the wine, so they need some people with the know-how.
Right, for
sure.
So
more than again, if we make the comparison with the Burgundy, which is a lovely place and great wine, it's for the moment still owned in huge majority by the family.
Right. So do I have to ask you what you like? But I won't do it. I won't do it because it'll get out in the press if I ask you what you like better, and then
it's difficult to make comparison.
I know. It's fascinating. I love both. I think they're great things to study. The academic side of both Burgundy. And I had a seminar where I finally learned through a cut diagram of the soil and the way the plates in Burgundy had shifted, and that's why if one root goes 30 meters or 10 meters, it touches a different type of soil than the vineyard next door, and so and it happens rather frequently in short order in Burgundy, and it's different than in Bordeaux. But Bordeaux is interesting because you have to be a blender. You have to know how to make a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. And that's what Beychevelle seems, the character I got out of what we just tasted was extraordinary, and a great balance of doing that. So when you leave Burgundy and you have to come and figure that out, is that a difficult transition, or does it take some time?
It takes a little bit sometimes to know, of course, the raw material first, the terroir, because we have also some great terroir and some difference, actually. It's probably less Um, well known than the Burgundy. Burgundy talks about the terroir, the climate, but it's also the case at Bordeaux actually.
I think
More
so.
that what we can believe. Then of course, yeah, it's a different approach with the blend, with different variety. But it makes sense. It's like if it's natural. In fact, when you are involved in this vineyard, you say there is no other way to make great Bordeaux without to make a blend between variety and different terroir. So
So if you Pomerol is different than Saint Julien, and it's different
exactly,
than Pauillac. It's different than the rest.
exactly.
So this is a business question. So if you
My
so
pleasure.
you're at Chateau Clinet and you're making good wines, how do you know in Bordeaux that there's a position open at Château Beychevelle that you want to
Oh,
thing, or does somebody come to you and say,
they are headhunter.
yeah, oh, there are
There are a lot.
winemaker headhunters,
Yeah.
winemaking headhunters.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
That's interesting. What's a
So,
headhunter in French? Is there a term for it? Tête to
Recruteur, recruteur.
oh, coutin. I have to get my name on that list. So they look for winemakers looking for their next step. And,
Exactly, exactly,
you
exactly.
Want to. That's so
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
I suppose we have them here too for the business.
I guess.
No one ever calls me though. That's one of the problems I don't understand.
Because you are the owner. You
Yeah,
should,
that's
you
true,
you
but-
have to apply. Yeah, you have to use a
Sometimes you
headphone.
feel like you just don't want to do that, and you want to just show up and make wine. That's what I'd like to do. So you came to Chateau Beychevelle in 2000. I read this in 2012,
Right.
and which was we got to taste that vintage as well as the
Yeah.
subsequent vintages and very good wines.
Thank you.
What was the challenge then when you? How did your predecessor leave the winery? Was it in good shape, and then did you make some changes right away that you felt it needed?
Yes. We have to be very, very modest when we are talking about such place. Definitely. And it's not. I mean, the history of Bechevelle is more than 300 years old. People worked and built this brand, built this wine, built this vineyard before me. And I used to say, whoever is the owner, whoever is the winemaker, the DNA is based on the terroir.
Mhm.
So, of course, each generation, thanks to his knowledge, thanks to his know-how or experience, try to bring something, a new stone to the building. But definitely, we have to be very modest. People before me did a great job, and you tasted also 2000. That's a generation that I know again, but before us, and a generation made a fabulous 88, 89, 82, 47, 45, and so on. So
45.
yeah, and we are lucky at Bechel to have a huge cellar with the oldest bottle is 1852. It's just amazing to see that those people made the wine which permitted the chateau to be classified in 1855.
Well,
So
that's true.
I try to do my best. I think everybody's happy because for the shareholders, of course, it's working well. But because the consumer are happy with our wine, journalists feel also give us good notation ranking. So, but we try. I had the chance, because that's the new generation, to work in California. What did I learn here? I learned you're open-minded. I mean, with quite simple question, you say why not, so what? We are in France the benchmark to what I can observe in terms of Bordeaux style or Burgundy style. But you are very smart to say with simple question why not, so what, and change a little bit the method or adapt the method to your terroir, to your vineyard, to your weather condition, and so on. So I learned this this in the New World, in New Zealand, and in Napa. I came also, for example, maybe it's funny or I believe in it, but with the pigeage punching down from Burgundy. It's not usual to do that in Bordeaux. So I love this method. And now we have also, my predecessor didn't have the equipment, the tools we got now, because we recreated a new winery in 2016. And it's just a pleasure to work with such equipment. one tank, one plot, or one plot, one tanks. When in the past we used to have around 50 different samples to make the blend, nowadays we got around 100.
Really?
Imagine I do the comparison with
That's hard to do.
the movie. Used to if you like a movie black and white, all one. Because that's the same idea. The terroir, the vineyard doesn't change, or not so much from that time, or from long time.
No, right.
And now you watch the same movie in colors with the 4K TV. That's not the same definition, and at the end, that's not the same pleasure. That's the same idea with the new winery. So now we increase the definition, we increase the precision, and normally I give you rendezvous to test the 2016 and so on, 17, 18, and you will see the step will be probably even better.
You've touched on a lot of things I'd like to talk about it. One of them being, yes, technology is a very progressive part of our business, and a lot of great things have happened. I even saw recently in Napa a table sorter that was laser driven, and it would peel off the grapes that were not so ripe, which is a fascinating and convenient thing to have. But at the same time, the generations that have made wine at Château Beychevelle from 1600, I think, or 1700, you said, we don't have that here. I had a winemaker in here. He's one of the first in Napa. It's 1969 as far as making wines. It's like a child. It's an infant. I think Michel Rolland once said you can't even consider a winery established until you've been there 100 years, right? You don't really know what it's doing yet. So when you get to go back and taste these really old vintages, I'm talking, let's say 100, let's just talk about 1920, something like that. What do you taste? Would you taste? Is it more rustic? Is it harsher? Or is it just as refined as it is today? Because those guys were just as passionate about what they did and the quality that they were putting out, and that they're responsible for what the soil was giving them, and they wanted to do the best they could. So how do those things feel when you taste them? Do they have?
Well, once again, I think those generation made with the tool they got at that time and with their knowledge. But the main things they found, that's to find the right place to grow vines. And once you have done that, you found at least 80-90% of the solution. The right place always makes great wines. So when we taste those whole vintages, it tells us a lot. It tells us the effort that people, or the belief, or the passion, we can share that, we can feel that. So it gives us some even more responsibility to say, okay, now with such money or such investment, such knowledge, we have to it push under pressure. So because now we are almost obliged to realize to manage to make the best wine as possible. So for sure,
it seems we have this technology, and we can do things cleaner, and we can sort out the lizards off of the stems, but there seems to be a movement almost back to less laboratory sort of analysis of the ripeness of the grapes and more tactile, where we're actually tasting the grapes more often, and we're checking the thickness of the skins more often, and we're in the vineyard every night looking for the right time to pick, and then we use the labs to sort of substantiate or corroborate what we're doing. There was one gentleman in here who was like the most rustic biodynamic process I've ever heard anybody talk about, and he said, when you step on a grape, when you crush a grape with your foot that's grown biodynamically in his particular vineyard, it resists much more than the grape down the road that was grown conventionally, which I thought was an interesting thing to say and to hear. But it seems to me that how are you deciding when it's time to pick? Because of the climate change and things going on in the world, you seems like the days are backing up, closer into the summer.
I don't use technology actually. We are, but that's the world where we live now. It's quite crazy. There is, for example, in France, you are obliged to prove with analysis to the administration that you did the right choice. I mean, the minimum level or characteristic analysis components are present in terms of maturity, in terms of technology, like acidity or sugar. But I do because we are obliged. So we have some analysis like that, but never ever I manage or I decide the date of the harvest with that. Never ever. I don't care.
Really?
Never. I go, I check and check again and check again and check also the weather forecasts, which are very important, even probably more in France than in the New World. And if it's okay, let's go. If it's not, and now we try to do as much as possible because we have the new winery where it's dedicated to the vineyard to have the perfect maturity of each plot. And sometimes we try as much as possible to make some start and stop. That means we pick the plot when it's our perfect maturity, then we make a stop. We wait for the next one. So when the weather forecast and weather condition are agree with that, are okay with that, we do that. So, but it's not a question of analysis. I don't care about analysis. I check. We work 24 hours a day for the winemaking process. I got 2 teams plus automatic pump. The idea is not to go too far in the extraction, is to be more precise. We increase the frequency, we decrease the intensity, and I check twice the morning, twice the afternoon, 100 tanks. Trust me, it's a lot of job. I'm totally destroyed at the end of the day. But we are much more precise, and we don't go too far by this way. But if we want to go farther, because it's rush hour, takes for us like it's like the rush hour for a chef. For us, it takes 8 days, but we have to be very present because the fermentations happen in 8 days. So if we want to be present, we need to be very engaged with that. So
that's it. I mean, that's fascinating, right? Because you're right. It's like the chef in the kitchen.
Exactly the same idea. You test and you are present, and it is not before, it is not after. There is a perfect right timing, which is the rush hour, and that's it. And no before, no after. And that's
so
you have to be present. You have to be ready 7 days per week during 1 month and a half.
How do you think the winemaker of that 1852, were they under the same pressure, the same,
No.
it's the same terroir, I mean, it's the same terroir, but do they understand this window? I mean, I'm just guessing.
Well,
it's for speculation, right?
Yeah, it's
fun.
only speculation because nobody was. We have
no one's around there.
Yeah, sure. What is funny with such place that we have because it has still been owned by very powerful family, and those family wasn't very working inside the chateau, so there was already a general manager and a winemaker, and they send letters or report to the owner, so
Yes.
we can check a little bit the pressure of that time actually, and it was existing already.
Sure,
It was
I'm
already
sure
the case. So, but maybe they were a little bit more fatalist. How do we say fatalist? Or it's fatality or
finality to it.
Nowadays we try to
Google Translate.
That's this new world. We try to try to manage everything, but sometimes when you are working with le vivant, with things alive, like the raw material, like yeast, like fruit transforming, you cannot manage everything. So we have to accept that. Actually, we accept it because that makes our wine from Bordeaux so special, with the notion of vintage. A vintage, you tasted 5 wines, you have seen that there is the same DNA coming from the terroir, but they got their own personality due to the weather, due to the vintage, actually. So
it's an interesting thing. 1850, which is the oldest wine, but the winery's been around since the 1600s. But the California wine industry really started about 1750. And it started right here down the street, about an hour, in a place called Cucamonga. And it made its way to Napa like 1850. But even then, and I was trying to think of the pressure you're under to make sure these wines are worldwide accepted, and wherever your best markets are. I'm sure Japan's big, and maybe China not yet, but going to be, and of course Europe. But there's a book out called Tangled Vines. It's a very interesting book, where I get some of the information I just told you. But there was another book written by a very famous chef, a California chef named George Mardikian, and he was the chef of San Francisco in the gold rush days in the 1840s. And they said in this book, because San Francisco was just becoming a town, the gold rush came, and there was a lot of money and no city. There wasn't a sophisticated city. It was just the dump. But the wines were coming from France. We didn't have the wines yet. The wines we made here weren't any good. And the guys that had all the gold were importing French wines. And I was just trying to think of, wow, probably that wasn't a whole lot going on back then. But since there was money in San Francisco and maybe New York, because New York was obviously well established. But today you're under a lot more pressure from sales standpoint, right? Making sure the world knows that Château Beychevelle's out there, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. We are, and we are happy with that. There are many great wines all over the world. We do have to take a responsibility to be still the leader. I mean, not only Beychevelle, but Bordeaux and Burgundy and Champagne. But that's the market, and that's pretty good. That push us to do our best. It obliges us to make some right decision, to be smart and to progress. So we feel okay with that. Of course, it's a little bit of pressure because we have a lot of light under our wines to check with the journalists, the imprimeur week, and so on. But it's also, on the other hand, very exciting. It's challenging, so it makes us give us a lot of motivation to do our best. So for the moment, I feel very happy with that.
What are the big markets, worldwide markets for Château Beychevelle? Was it obviously the North America is big?
If I'm here, we would like to be present again and again, and even better in Northern America. Beychevelle is a strong brand forever, thanks to the previous owner, and since more than 1855, it has always been a great place, very well known. Nowadays, thanks to the international or the global world market, we are also very present in Asia, very strong in Asia. So that's a good point. But we want to be present everywhere in the world. That's not our volunteers to be dependent of one market. We would like to be totally well distributed all over the world.
I was just looking at the label again. It is one of those labels that when I see on the shelf, I recognize it immediately.
Yeah.
There's a handful of those labels, right?
Yeah.
That you just know.
No Château. There is no Château. The history. Maybe if you want to repeat again, with Beychevelle, first owner, the Duc d'Epernon at the 16th century, very powerful man in charge of all the French Navy, and the legend, the myth. Nobody was there, so you have to trust me. Said that because we're in front of the river, all the boat we were crossing the chateau at that time has to lower their sail in terms of respect to the Admiral of France, the Duc d'Epernon. And so in all French, in Gascon, the dialogue, local dialogue at that time, it was to pronounce Beychevelle means baisser la voile en français, lower the sail in English. So that's the reason why of the name. Reason of the logo, there is no chateau, it's a boat with a sail half down. And that's a lovely story, actually.
Now, wait a minute. So you think that they lowered the sail because of the respect to the
Admiral?
The Admiral. And not because it was alcohol that they get to stop and fill the...
No, you're right. There is a new scientific version or historian version which says that to come from the ocean to Bordeaux with the tie, you couldn't do it in one time. And Beychevelle is pretty much in the middle of this way. So all the boat, that was probably the case that they have their sail half down or down. Not even only with the respect, maybe, but also because they were waiting for the new tide to go to the ocean or to go to Bordeaux.
Right.
And as we are in the middle, that was pretty much the timing to do that.
Is the Gironde still a very important waterway for commerce?
We have a port. No, it wasn't an important port, but we still have a port.
Yeah, you do.
Historical port, and you can still visit the port. It's very nice.
And the town of Saint-Julien is a big town?
It wasn't big town, but Beychevelle has been always the heart of this town. And the best proof is in this suburb, in this area, there was no church. And at that time, maybe it's less the case anymore, but at that time, I mean, the history till now, it was very important to have a church. And the only church we got in all this area was the Château of Beychevelle. All the wedding,
really?
all the baptism, all Catholics events, what happened to the Château Beychevelle. Beychevelle was the big place. Château Beychevelle was the big place of this area.
Is it
very,
still
very
a
powerful
functioning
place.
church in Château Beychevelle?
We still have the church.
Yeah. I mean, people, is it used by the Catholics? Not
You
too
know,
much. Huh?
I think
Well, but I know that Clovis brought Christianity to France in the Franks, the three nations, like in what, 1400 or 1300? Something like
older,
that.
yeah.
So it wasn't that much later that Beycheville was founded and making wine. So it's pretty early on in the history of probably the Catholic Church, as well as the cathedrals throughout France, right? I mean,
Maybe.
It's pretty interesting. So we were in Pauillac about a year ago, and it was interesting to my wife and I because we already discussed that Napa Valley is this whole commercial corridor of
Right.
Restaurants and places to drink and stuff, but it's different in Bordeaux. But Pauillac seemed very depressed. Deepirement, no, it's a very, very old town. But what was fascinating was on one side is Chateau Latour, on the other side is Chateau Lafitte, and all this wealth and money and contemporary things, and then this little town in the middle. Were those towns more commerce oriented in their earlier days? Were they important towns for the commerce in France in that
What
area?
we observe nowadays that the main town in province are very wealthy, like Bordeaux.
Yeah.
Bordeaux, if you visited Bordeaux now, it's very wonderful city.
Yes. Big city.
It looks like a very high activity, a lot of energy, it's
It is.
beautiful to
Yeah.
visit. And on the other hand, the rest of the province, people with money going only to Bordeaux and stay in Bordeaux.
Yeah.
And so that's right that there is big opposition between
Yeah.
the province and the main town.
Juxtaposition, yeah.
So which wasn't the case in the past. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Right.
let's see the future, but for the moment, that's the way it is. Yeah.
Back to winemaking. We brought you bring the grapes in. We talked about the climate and the hourly testing of the grapes to make sure they're right. So do you use natural yeast or do you inoculate?
Both.
Both.
Yeah, both. I feel more relaxed by using the yeast that you can buy on the market. There
To
are,
make sure the fermentation continues and they tend to be stronger. No.
especially now because we have such high level natural sugar
Yes.
and then alcohol to transform sugar to transform into alcohol. I mean, so it's a big issue. So and it's
I don't know. I was trying to figure that out. Are not the yeasts you buy from the source from grapes in the first place? Aren't they yeast that were harvested from previous grapes? Aren't they natural yeast as well? Aren't they more concentrated, or because I understand the difference. You could get a stuck fermentation with a natural yeast, and all of a sudden you get big problems. But it seems to me that they're natural yeasts already. I mean, right?
That's right. That's right. But in the vineyard, there are not only friendly yeast. So
Apparently millions of them.
it's for sure millions of different varieties of yeast. It's once again we are not under pressure, but we want to be sure to reach the product we are expecting, so we don't want to take so much risk, actually.
I agree with that. I mean, I totally agree with that. I think that's very important. I've probably told this story too many times, but I was taken to a New York natural wine shop, and we bought a wine that cost me $75. And I told my daughter, I said, this is a lot of money, particularly for me, since we're in the business. And it was terrible. And it was a Sicilian Nero d'Avola made supposedly whatever natural means, right? And she's like, but Dad, it's natural. I said, but so is vinegar. You know,
You
so
know, I really agree, because that happened to my friends, that happened to my brother, that happens to me, and at certain point I said, stop, stop
yeah,
bullshit. If we want good wine,
we want to enjoy it.
enjoying. So I don't want to enjoy the label. I don't want to enjoy not only the history. Okay, if it's great, okay. If it's a natural, yes, why not? But at the end, I want to take pleasure with the wine. And if it's not the case, if it's turned into vinegar, which is often the case, I don't want to
We
buy
want a
it.
part of it. I think that part is missed, and I'm not saying that the consumer knows any worse or better, but and I say this almost in every conversation I have with folks in your business, and it's taken me 30 years really in the last couple of years, and having conversations with people like you to understand the passion behind the wine. And I had a young lady here; she was from Armenia. And she had a winery in Argentina, and she had a winery in Armenia. Now, Armenian wine, I can tell you, like we were there 10 years ago, it was undrinkable. And now they have French technology, they have French winemakers, and the stuff is kind of interesting, right? But her comment was, what other product can you take that's from the soil, if you express the soil and the terroir and the culture, and take it across the world? You brought me Bordeaux from Saint-Julien, and I get to taste what it tastes like. It's what it is. That's where it's from. That's what I'm sensing when I taste it, and that's what I'm connecting to. You don't do that with beer, and you don't do that with bourbon, and you don't do that with, maybe with coffee a little bit, but you get to transport this across the world and represent what is happening in your town, your little town of Saint-Julien. And I think that's a fascinating part of wine. That's the passion of wine, in my opinion. Because when I go home tonight, if I want to like a little buzz, I'll have my bourbon, right? That's why I do that. Or gin through my father. But if my wife says she wants a glass of wine and I sit with her, it's a totally different conversation. And I think that is the passion that you bring to the bottle. And I think that's the difference of regular wine that made just to consume, and a brand like this.
That's right.
We're bringing in America, we have this problem now. It's a very complicated and congested problem, and that is people are bringing in literally 50,000 gallon bladders of not even €1 bottle wines, not even €1, somewhere around 0.8 of a euro, and putting it in the bottle and calling it wine. And my position is, if I'm sitting at a dinner table and somebody pours something like that, I mean, it can't be very pleasant, right? It can't be. Impossible. You can't possibly put that much passion in a 50,000 gallon bladder. There's not enough passion to go around, right? So how is that an experience? This is a hypothetical question. How is that an experience for the wine consumer to say something like, not very good? Or, hey, I only paid $3 for this. That's not an experience.
Yeah, you're right.
This is an experience.
I think so. Thank you.
And you've put it in the bottle. And I think you've represented Saint-Julien and the history of Beychevelle very well. Beychevelle.
Perfect.
I want to say Beychevelle.
Perfect French.
So what's next? You mentioned that there was some new technologies that you did some things to the winery.
So now we have a new winery. We are still working, but I'm not in a position with the past and the future and with the technology or without technology. I told you I like to try. I prefer to check my berries to take the decision of picking. Nowadays we got we do some try with horse. We are not working all the vineyard with a horse, but we are doing some try. On the other hand, we use a drone to have a view of the vineyard and how it's going well or not, to have a better view. So we are open-minded. We do some try. And by doing that, we try to take the best decision for the future. At short-term or long-term vision, we shortly or recently decided to probably not to replant so much vines. We prefer to take the decision to keep the oldest one because it's such potential. It means so even if they are not producing a lot of quantity of grapes and then wines, the grape they are coming from those vines are so good. It makes the quality. We are definitely driven by the quality. We are focused on the quality. That's the only message. That's the only vision of the shareholders, and so that means that's our mission. Making the best wine as possible. When you got that mission, you make some choice.
That's
and
the
you
focus.
you study everything on the table. There is no taboo. I don't know, we said taboo in English.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Taboo. Okay, if it's drawn, it's drawn. If it's scientific sorting tables, optical sorting tables, why not? If it's checking twice the vines per day, let's do it. Or using a horse in the vineyard, why not? So we
That's
tried
interesting,
that.
using a horse.
Because
plow or
we observe is the main things was to protect the vines, as we are not using chemical products to kill the grass. I mean the grass.
So it's organic farming.
Not
to
on
kill the weeds?
not on the weeds.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So, but what we observe is that with machine trucks is very heavy, and it works pretty well, but sometimes it's destroyed too much. It roots up too much vines, and
Compresses the dirt.
and yeah. So we are doing a serious try, with the comparison with trucks and horse, and
That's
in
amazing.
different plot, and we are counting after every action how many vines are died or not, and
That is fascinating.
the horse, we have to recognize it's in the good position.
Yeah, the horse is
because
winning.
and it's actually it's so lovely to see in the vineyard. I'm not sure we will be able to go at one working only with horse on 100 hectares, but for the moment it's just a try. I'm not saying we are doing that. It's not communication or marketing. It's just a try for us.
Well, let me throw something at you to try. There was a winemaker from Sardinia who's playing classical music in the vineyards. No, but he said, you want to believe it, right? Because you want to think, okay, that kind of makes sense. But he said, we played classical music in one room and we played rock music in the other, and the vines grew away from the rock music and they grew toward the classical music, okay? And so now there's music throughout the whole vineyard, which I think is a fascinating idea. Wow, what the hell? But you're going to put a horse, and I think that's really special, actually. I think that's like really showing concern.
I always try to be pragmatist. I like the pragmatism
Yes.
of, for example, of American or the New World. So concerning the music, I'm not so sure about that.
That's not pragmatic.
Yeah, it doesn't sound so pragmatic. So
I
why
got a
not?
kick out of it anyway. I just asked the guy, I said, are the neighbors complaining that the music throughout the whole vineyard because it's making all kinds of noise all the time?
Neighbors benefiting
Yeah,
from it
so
too.
well, this has been a fascinating conversation, Romain. I really appreciate you coming out. I know you had a busy day. You've been traveling a lot. It's a very
That's a pleasure.
Difficult timing for
No.
getting up every morning and getting out and doing this. And you already had a
No worry with
seminar
that.
today, which I missed, but I hope we got to cover all those points today. But fascinating conversation. I'm going to bring a couple cases in of these of your vintages.
Thank you.
I appreciate the 2010, but I want the 2012 and the
Thank
14. So we'll do that, and I'm going to start, telling my friends that are building these wine cellars that this is the kinds of things we need to put in the cellar. These are the types of things
I think
you need
so.
to serve.
I think so. I thank
So,
you.
I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
That was very a pleasure to be by
Thank
your
you.
side, and thank you for all the great job you are doing. We need you, and we love passionate people like you, like your father before, and
Thank
so
you.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.